By day 2, the situation escalated beautifully. Tom Rivera had hired a plumber who confirmed the shoot-offs were intentional. Mrs. Peterson was hauling water jugs from her daughter's house across town. The Rodriguez family was seriously considering breaking their lease. But Karen had miscalculated one crucial factor. Desperation makes people resourceful. At the emergency HOA meeting called for Thursday night, Karen faced a room full of residents carrying water bottles, legal documents, and recording devices. Tom Rivera stood at the microphone, his voice steady and dangerous. "Karen, we've documented everything. The selective water shoot-offs, the retaliatory assessments, the abuse of emergency powers. My attorney says we have grounds for criminal harassment charges, not just civil action." Karen's prepared speech about infrastructure safety died in her throat. These weren't confused homeowners anymore. They were an organized opposition with legal backing and documented evidence. Furthermore, Tom continued, "We've petitioned the county to investigate HOA fund mismanagement. Funny how the drainage assessment money went to a consulting company owned by your brother-in-law." The room buzzed with shocked murmurs. Karen hadn't thought anyone would dig that deep, but desperate people apparently made thorough researches. Her carefully constructed authority was crumbling in real time. "That's a coincidence," she managed weakly. "Is it also a coincidence that the water shoot-offs only affected households supporting your recall?" The vote was swift and unanimous. Karen Whitfield was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The board would pursue legal action for recovery of misused funds and utility tampering. Criminal charges were still on the table. As residents filed out, chattering excitedly about their liberation, Karen sat alone in the fluorescent-lit community center. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gerald Hutchins, her attorney. "Karen, we need to talk. Tomorrow 9 a.m. Bring all HOA financial records." Outside, she could hear Tom Rivera organizing volunteer crews to restore water service. Mrs. Peterson was actually laughing, a sound Karen hadn't heard from her in 3 years. But as Karen gathered her laminated handbooks and carefully organized violation notices, one thought kept repeating. They might have won this battle, but the war was far from over. She still knew every resident's secrets, every property violation, every weakness in their perfect suburban lives. And Karen Whitfield had always been better at playing the long game than anyone realized. The question was, how far was she willing to go for revenge? The room erupted. A $2,800 per household assessment to hire hydrologists, soil engineers, and environmental consultants, all to study problems that hadn't existed until Karen's dam project. "This is insane," shouted Tom Rivera from Lot 47. "You created this mess, Karen. Why should we pay for your mistakes?" Karen's smile was ice cold. "Because, Tom, your property sits directly upstream from mine. If my drainage fails completely, guess where all that water goes next?" It was a masterful manipulation. Karen had spent her weekend studying property surveys, elevation maps, and drainage patterns with the obsessive focus she usually reserved for bylaw violations. She'd identified exactly which homeowners would flood next if her basement situation worsened. Furthermore, she continued, "I've discovered several properties with unpermitted drainage modifications that may be contributing to the problem. Mrs. Peterson's filled drainage ditch, for example, or the Rodriguez family's new rain garden." Mrs. Peterson turned pale. "You told me to fill that ditch. Said it was an eyesore." "I said no such thing. I have no record of that conversation." Karen's denial was technically true. She'd never written it down, and therefore, in her world, it had never happened. The meeting devolved into chaos, but Karen maintained control through parliamentary procedure and sheer force of will. When the smoke cleared, she'd secured approval for a $500 per household emergency assessment and established a drainage crisis committee, with herself as chairwoman naturally. But victory felt hollow. As residents filed out, muttering about recalls and legal action, Karen noticed something that made her blood run cold. People were no longer afraid of her. Tom Rivera actually laughed when she reminded him about his grass height violation. Mrs. Peterson rolled her eyes at Karen's farewell speech about community responsibility. That night, Karen stood in her damp basement, surrounded by industrial fans and dehumidifiers, and realized her true enemy wasn't the construction company or faulty engineering. It was the growing realization among her neighbors that she was fallible. And in the HOA world, perceived weakness was blood in the water. She needed a bigger victory, something to restore the natural order and remind everyone exactly who ran Willowbrook Estates. As she climbed the stairs to bed, Karen was already planning her next move. If her neighbors wanted to test her authority, they'd learn exactly how far she was willing to go to maintain it. The water war was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Karen stood in the Willowbrook Estates water utility control room, holding a ring of master keys she'd temporarily borrowed from the maintenance supervisor's unmarked truck. The digital control panel glowed like a spaceship dashboard, and for the first time in days, Karen smiled. The drainage assessment had backfired spectacularly. 3 homeowners had hired their own lawyers. The local newspaper was investigating her dam approval process, and someone had started a Recall Karen Facebook group with 847 members. But Karen Whitfield hadn't become HOA president by backing down from fights. She'd won by escalating them beyond her opponent's comfort zones. If they want to play hardball, she whispered to the humming machinery, let's see how they like living without water. The beauty of her plan was its legal ambiguity. As HOA president, Karen technically had emergency authority to shut off utilities during infrastructure crisis. The dam situation qualified, and her recent drainage studies had conveniently identified critical system vulnerabilities that required immediate attention. At 11 p.m., Karen methodically began shutting off water mains. Not Everionis. She wasn't stupid. She carefully targeted her strongest opponents: Tom Rivera, Mrs. Peterson, the Rodriguez family, and 12 other households whose residents had been most vocal at recent meetings. By morning, the phone call started. Karen, we have no water pressure. Tom Rivera's voice was dangerously calm. My wife needs to shower for work, and our toilets won't flush. I understand your frustration, Tom, Karen replied with practiced sympathy. The Drainage Crisis Committee identified several emergency shutoffs necessary for system stability. We're working around the clock to restore service safely. This is insane. You can't just turn off people's water. Actually, Tom, if you review Section 47B of the Community Bylaws, emergency infrastructure measures are well within HOA authority. I'd be happy to email you the relevant documentation. The documentation didn't actually support her actions, but Karen knew most residents wouldn't read 47 pages of legal text to find out. She'd learned long ago that confidence and official-sounding language could substitute for actual authority. Karen Whitfield stood knee-deep in muddy water at 6 a.m., her pristine white tennis skirt now the color of chocolate milk, screaming at a bewildered construction crew. You idiots built the dam on the wrong side of the property line, she shrieked, waving her laminated HOA handbook like a weapon. The workers exchanged glances. They'd been hired to beautify the community creek, not become casualties in a suburban war zone. 30 minutes earlier, Karen had discovered her basement flooded with 3 inches of creek water, her designer storage boxes floating like designer rafts. Her prized collection of HOA violation notices, organized by severity and laminated for posterity, now bobbed helplessly in brown water. The irony wasn't lost on her neighbors, who'd received dozens of those very notices over the years. Ma'am, the foreman tried to interrupt. The plans clearly show. Don't you ma'am me? Karen's voice could shatter glass. I am the Willowbrook Estates HOA president, and this is my property being destroyed by your incompetence. The truth was more complicated. Karen had enthusiastically approved the creek beautification project 3 months ago, envisioning a picturesque water feature that would boost property values and give her something new to regulate. She'd personally selected the spot for the decorative dam, insisting it be visible from the main street to showcase the HOA's environmental consciousness. What she hadn't anticipated was basic hydrology. Back in her flooded basement, Karen's husband Rick emerged from behind the water heater, soaked and exasperated. Karen, The water's backing up because your dam is blocking natural drainage. The creek needs to flow downhill, not pool in our backyard. Don't blame me for their construction errors, Karen snapped. But her voice wavered. She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed her attorney, Gerald Hutchins, who'd grown wealthy handling Karen's various neighborhood disputes. Gerald, I need an injunction. The construction company damaged my property, and I want them liable for every penny. Karen, it's 6:15 in the morning. Property damage doesn't sleep, Gerald. As she paced through ankle-deep water, Karen's mind raced. This wasn't just about her basement. This was about control, respect, and the natural order of Willowbrook Estates. She was the woman who'd single-handedly banned pink flamingo lawn ornaments, standardized mailbox heights to the quarter-inch, and instituted mandatory holiday decoration guidelines. She wasn't about to let some contractors and their gravity excuses undermine her authority. By noon, Karen had called an emergency HOA meeting, sent certified letters to 3 lawyers, and filed complaints with the City Planning Office, the State Environmental Agency, and the Better Business Bureau. She'd also drafted a 27-page incident report, complete with time-stamped photos and a hand-drawn diagram of water flow patterns. But as she stood in her living room, watching muddy water seep through her hardwood floors, Karen realized something that chilled her more than the creek water. For the first time in her HOA career, she might actually be wrong. And being wrong meant losing control. The stakes had never been higher. 3 days later, Karen discovered that being wrong was far more expensive than being right. Her insurance company had denied her claim after a 5-minute conversation with the construction foreman. Her basement restoration estimate topped $47,000. And worst of all, her neighbors were laughing. Did you see Karen's basement swimming pool? She overheard Mrs. Peterson whisper to the mailman, maybe now she'll understand why I needed that drainage ditch she made me fill in last year. The betrayal cut deep. These were people Karen had protected from property value decline, from the chaos of unregulated lawn gnome placement, from the anarchy of non-beige paint colors. This was the thanks she got? Karen's response was swift and surgical. She called an emergency HOA board meeting for that evening, her agenda typed in 14-point font with bullet points underlined for emphasis. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as residents filed in, many wearing rain boots and knowing smirks. As you all know, Karen began, her voice tight with controlled fury. Recent events have highlighted serious drainage issues in our community, issues that could affect all of us. Board member Jim Hendricks raised his hand. Karen, didn't you approve the dam placement? I have the minutes right here. The placement was based on faulty engineering recommendations. Karen interrupted smoothly. Which brings me to tonight's main agenda item, emergency assessments for comprehensive property drainage studies.